What do you do when the person you love the most hides a secret so shocking it shatters everything you thought you knew? This is the haunting story of betrayal, rage, and a truth that no one could have ever seen coming. Stay with me as we unravel the real truth. Welcome to Fatal Affairs, a channel solely focused on bringing daily told and untold crime cases on love, betrayal, and revenge. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your unwavering support. And please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for future updates. We would really appreciate that. In a quiet corner of Houston, Texas, a picture-perfect couple lived what seemed to be a fairy tale life. Ethan Brooks, a tall, rugged construction worker with a deep commitment to family and community, had built a life of stability and pride. Raised in a conservative household, he held traditional values close to his heart, especially when it came to marriage. He was known for his selflessness, always putting others before himself, an epitome of devotion. His friends joked that Ethan would take care of anyone, even at his own expense. He was a protector, a provider, and a man who seemed to have everything he could ever need. And then there was Chloe Davis. Beautiful, with an infectious smile and captivating dark eyes, Chloe worked as a hairstylist and quickly became a rising star in the local beauty scene. People were drawn to her warmth, to the way she made everyone feel special. It wasn't long before Ethan found himself irresistibly drawn to her. Their courtship was swift yet intense, catching the attention of everyone around them. Within months of meeting at a local church event, Ethan proudly introduced Chloe to his family, showing her off as the woman he intended to spend the rest of his life with. Their connection was undeniable. Ethan's proposal came soon after, and Chloe's acceptance was filled with tears of joy. They seemed like the perfect couple, the kind everyone else envied. Their wedding day was nothing short of a fairy tale, a grand ceremony at the historic Houston Baptist Church with over 200 guests. As Chloe walked down the aisle in her shimmering white gown, Ethan's heart raced with excitement, believing that his life was finally falling into place. Yet even in the midst of their joy, Ethan couldn't shake an unsettling feeling. Chloe, despite the beauty of the day, seemed distant at times. Her smile, though genuine, didn't quite reach her eyes. Ethan dismissed the fleeting moments, blaming them on the usual wedding day jitters. But deep down, something about Chloe's behavior felt off. Her trembling hands as they exchanged vows didn't escape Ethan's notice. He attributed it to nerves, but that sense of unease lingered in his mind, waiting for an explanation that never came. The honeymoon in the Caribbean was filled with sun, sand, and endless romance. But even in paradise, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Chloe was holding something back. She would often withdraw, her laughter fading into silence, her eyes clouded with something unspoken. When they returned home to their cozy house in Houston, Ethan noticed subtle shifts in Chloe's behavior. She became more secretive, locking her phone whenever he was around and disappearing for hours without explanation. He initially brushed it off as her being busy with work. After all, she was building her beauty business and had a lot on her plate. But Ethan's instincts told him something was wrong. When he dropped by her salon to surprise her, it was empty. She told him she had a late meeting with friends she had never mentioned before, and as her excuses grew, so did the knot of suspicion tightening in Ethan's gut. Still, he couldn't believe the worst. He loved Chloe deeply, and the thought of betrayal gnawed at him. He convinced himself that no relationship was perfect and that the stress of newlywed life and business pressures were simply taking a toll. But despite his best efforts to ignore it, the tension between them grew. Their intimacy became less frequent, and when it did happen, it felt strained. Chloe often turned away during moments that should have been full of connection, her demeanor distant as if holding back something significant. Ethan felt a deep ache, a growing emptiness between them. And despite everything, he couldn't shake the feeling that Chloe was hiding something from him. It wasn't until one fateful night that Ethan's suspicions finally drove him to act. He had always respected Chloe's privacy, but the mounting doubts made it impossible to ignore anymore. The woman he loved had become a stranger to him, one who was slipping further away with every secret she kept. Ethan had never imagined that this would be the path he would take, but the need to uncover the truth overpowered his usual restraint. One evening, as Chloe went out with friends Ethan had never heard of, he couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. As the door clicked shut behind her, Ethan found himself walking toward their bedroom with a single, overpowering thought. He had to know what she was hiding. Ethan rummaged through her belongings, carefully but methodically, as the clock ticked away in the background. There was a tension in the air, as if the house itself were holding its breath. He searched through drawers and old clothes until something caught his eye, something small and hidden. A box. At first glance it seemed harmless enough, but Ethan's heart raced as he opened it. Inside, he found a birth certificate bearing a name he didn't recognize, Elliot Davis. His blood ran cold. He dug deeper, his trembling hands pulling out more documents, medical records. These weren't just ordinary papers, they were detailed reports about Chloe's transition from male to female. The truth hit him like a tidal wave, stealing the air from his lungs. The woman he had married, the woman he had vowed to love and cherish for the rest of his life, had kept this monumental truth from him. Chloe had lived with a past that was now staring him in the face, one he had no idea about. Shock turned into a deep, gut-wrenching rage. Ethan sat on the bed, the papers sprawled out in front of him, his mind racing in 1,000 different directions. How could Chloe have hidden something so crucial? His entire world felt as though it had been flipped upside down. The Chloe he thought he knew now seemed like a complete stranger, a woman who had deceived him on the most intimate level. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. How long had she kept this secret? Why had she never told him? By the time Chloe returned home that night, Ethan was beyond distraught. He didn't want to confront her, but the truth had already destroyed him. He could barely breathe as he waited for her, and when the door opened, the moment was inevitable. Chloe froze in the doorway, her eyes falling on the documents spread out before him. Ethan stood slowly, his voice barely a whisper but heavy with fury. "You lied to me." Chloe's face drained of color as she registered what he had uncovered. Her hand tightened around the doorframe, her whole body tensing. She could see the devastation in his eyes, and despite the guilt weighing heavily on her heart, she took a deep breath and stepped cautiously toward him. "Ethan, please, I was going to tell you. I swear I was. I didn't know how to. I love you," she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. "This doesn't change who I am or who you are." But Ethan's eyes burned with a fury that was palpable. "It does change everything, Chloe. You've been lying to me from the start." His voice grew louder, frantic with disbelief. "I gave you everything, my love, my loyalty, my life, and this whole time, you've been hiding this from me? This is who you are, and you didn't trust me enough to share that. You tricked me into marrying you." The words stung, each one cutting deeper into Chloe's heart. She had hoped for understanding, for acceptance, but the sight of her husband, the man she loved, so consumed by rage and confusion, made it clear that she was no longer the woman he thought she was. "I didn't tell you because I was afraid," Chloe cried, her voice trembling with the weight of her confession. "I thought if you knew, you wouldn't love me anymore." Ethan's anger flared. "You thought right," he spat, his voice dripping with disgust. "You've destroyed everything." Chloe reached out, her hands trembling as she tried to calm him. "Ethan, please, just listen to me. We can talk about this. I'll answer everything. Just please, don't do something rash." But Ethan couldn't hear her anymore. All he could see was the deception, the years of lies. The betrayal felt too deep, too impossible to forgive. In that moment, his mind snapped. The man who had promised to love and protect her became someone unrecognizable. Without another word, Ethan stormed out of the room, his steps heavy with fury. He was no longer thinking clearly. He was consumed by rage. His hands shook as he grabbed the nearest object, a hammer. When he returned, Chloe stood in the bedroom, her eyes wide with fear. She took a step back as she saw the hammer in his hand, her breath catching in her throat. "Ethan, please, don't," she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. The first blow was swift. Chloe screamed, her body jerking back in pain, but Ethan didn't stop. Blow after blow landed, each one fueled by a rage so intense it eclipsed everything. Her screams filled the house, but they were drowned out by the sickening sound of the hammer striking her. The house was eerily silent when the chaos stopped. Ethan stood in the middle of the bedroom, his body drenched in sweat, his hands still gripping the hammer, trembling from the overwhelming surge of emotions that had poured out of him. His mind was a blur, the weight of his actions sinking in with every passing second. His wife, his beloved Chloe, was gone, and he had taken everything from her in a brutal, unstoppable outburst. He could barely breathe as he looked at the blood that stained the room. It was as though time had frozen in place. Ethan stared down at the lifeless body of the woman he had once loved, the woman he had built a life with. How had it all come to this? Without thinking, Ethan dragged Chloe's lifeless body into the bathroom, his grip on reality slipping further with each passing moment. The hammer had not been enough to end the turmoil in his soul, so he grabbed a knife from the kitchen, the cold steel an extension of the chaos inside his mind. The violent mutilation that followed was a reflection of the complete disintegration of everything he had once been. Outside, the night continued as usual, completely unaware of the horror unfolding inside the home. Yet, inside those walls, a war was raging, between rage, regret, and the slow realization of what he had done. Ethan couldn't undo the violence he had just unleashed, and the world he once knew now felt like a distant memory. Hours later, the horror of his actions still heavy on his chest, Ethan picked up his phone. His hands shook as he dialed the number for the police. His voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. I killed her. The 911 operator, calm but firm, tried to keep him on the line. Sir, what happened? Can you tell me where you are? But Ethan could barely form words. His mind was clouded with grief, disbelief, and guilt. His love for Chloe, once so pure, was now overshadowed by the tragedy he had caused. The operator tried again to get more details, but Ethan could only repeat one thing. I killed her. When the police arrived, the scene was one that would haunt even the most seasoned officers. Ethan sat on the floor next to Chloe's mutilated body, covered in blood, staring blankly at the devastation around him. His face was a mask of disbelief, as though he could not comprehend the horror he had just created. The man who had been a hard-working husband, a proud man, now sat broken, a shell of the person he used to be. As the police moved into the room, their gaze fell on the gruesome sight. The walls were stained with blood, and the once lovely home was now a crime scene of unimaginable brutality. The officers didn't need to ask any questions to know what had happened. It was clear, even without words, that Ethan was the one responsible. Yet when asked why, Ethan offered no explanation, only the broken words, I didn't know, I loved her. She lied to me. The police officers were in shock, trying to process the scale of what they had just encountered. They found Ethan incoherent and distant, his hands still stained with Chloe's blood. He didn't resist arrest. He didn't fight. It was as though he had already accepted the punishment for his actions. At the police station, the interrogation was brief, but still haunting. The detectives, seasoned by years of experience, tried to get Ethan to explain the unimaginable. Why had he done this? I didn't know, Ethan repeated. She wasn't who I thought she was. The detectives pushed harder. So you decided to kill her? Mutilate her body? Do you even understand what you've done? Ethan's gaze dropped, and he stayed silent for a long time. His sorrow and guilt were palpable, but the weight of his actions was too much for him to bear. It was clear that his fragile mind had been pushed to the edge by the betrayal he had discovered. The media soon descended on the case, drawn by the grisly details and the shocking revelation about Chloe's past. The story spread like wildfire, igniting debates about secrecy, gender identity, and the fragile nature of trust. As the news of Chloe's murder went public, people found themselves divided. Some saw Ethan as a man who had been betrayed by the woman he loved, while others condemned him as nothing more than a murderer. Chloe's past, her secret life as a transgender woman, became the focus of media scrutiny. While some sympathized with her struggle to live authentically, others used her identity to further vilify Ethan's actions. What had started as a tragic and deeply personal situation quickly morphed into a larger, public conversation about gender, identity, and violence. The trial that followed captivated the nation, with both sides of the story being presented in the courtroom. On one hand, Ethan's defense team argued that his rage had been fueled by emotional distress, pointing to the shock of learning about Chloe's secret and the emotional toll it had taken on him. They portrayed him as a man who had reached his breaking point after years of devotion, only to be confronted with a reality that he couldn't accept. On the other hand, the prosecution presented Ethan as a cold-blooded killer, emphasizing the brutal violence he had inflicted on Chloe and the fact that he had mutilated her body beyond recognition. The question of whether his emotional distress justified such brutality was the central focus of the case. The courtroom was filled with emotion as Chloe's mother took the stand, recounting the pain she had felt as a mother who had watched her daughter struggle with her identity. She spoke of Chloe's love for Ethan and the heartbreaking weight of never being able to tell him the truth. The jury deliberated for days, but in the end, the verdict was delivered. Ethan was guilty of first-degree murder. Ethan's life, the life he had once built with hope and love, was now destroyed beyond repair. And this only goes to prove that sometimes the darkest secrets come to light with the most unimaginable consequences, leaving a trail of destruction that no amount of remorse can undo. If you found this story interesting, please hit the like button and leave a comment below. Also, don't forget to subscribe for more daily chilling true crime stories on love, betrayal, and revenge. See you on the next one.